Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Today at BSI, which stands for British Standards Institution, we're going to review corporate social responsibility risks and ethical risks within the supply chain. My name is Courtney Foster, and I'm the Supply Chain Solutions Manager here at BSI for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. As I said, today our main focus is going to be highlighting the corporate social responsibility issues within the supply chain. And what we'll do is we'll first start with an introduction to who BSI is, why the CSR and ethical issues are important, an overview of some key pieces of human rights legislation that have come into effect, and then what we're going to do is outline 5 steps on how to develop and maintain an ethical supply chain risk assessment program. So, like I said, by way of introduction of who BSI is, BSI again stands for British Standards Institution, and essentially BSI was the world's first national standards body here in the UK. It was a founding member of the ISO standards organization, and we at BSI issue about 2,000 standards each year and carry about 150,000 assessments on these standards into non-accredited schemes each year. So here I'm representing the BSI Supply Chain Solutions Division, which has 20 years of experience assessing global supply chain related threats. We provide intelligence, risk modeling, and on-site auditing for corporations. And in three main fashions. The first, as you can see here, the first of the 3 boxes here on this screen are the intelligence tool. And BSI's intelligence is derived from our in-house dedicated intelligence team, where we day in and day out pulse the world of the latest and greatest supply chain related threats. These threats come in a number of different areas, focusing on social responsibility, things like ethical risks, environmental risks. We also look at business continuity risks as well as supply chain security related risks. So essentially what our intelligence team does is present on news-related events that have happened in the last day as it relates to supply chain threats. We also focus and report on analysis, so the latest trends, so short-term trends, which then develop into long-term trends that produce heat maps, and we produce country risk ratings for every country in the world, as you can see on the bottom left-hand side of your screen there. We then overlay that intelligence with our audit platform, which we call Supplier Compliance Manager. And essentially what that is your one-stop shop audit risk assessment platform to both send out self-assessments, collect the results, host on-site audit results, and then really be a risk engineer to actually create your risk profile for your suppliers, track the assessments to completion, facilitate corrective actions, dashboarding, mapping, really everything you could need and want as it relates to supply chain related issues. And then finally, we at BSI also carry out second party audits. So we actually can be your eyes and ears on the ground, carrying out ethical and environmental risk audits, in addition to other subject areas like security or quality, where we're actually sending our auditors who are placed in and carry out assessments in over 150 countries each year into your suppliers on your behalf and be those eyes and ears on the ground for you. So that's really just a by way of introduction to who BSI is at the beginning. And now what we'll do is we'll go over, why are ethical issues important within the supply chain? Why should you care? Why should you take notice and care about the issues that are presented? And first things first, ethical issues within your supply chain directly relate to your company's corporate brand. And so many companies nowadays are attributing much more brand value to their reputation. So just a few statistics here that about 87% of executives say that a strong corporate brand is just as important, if not more important, than a strong product brand. And that again just shows that the brand that you and the perception that you have out within the marketplace is really directly related to how successful and how strong your company is. And a lot of the market value is being attributed to that brand reputation, that brand value that you're working so hard to maintain. So these ethical issues within your supply chain directly relate to maintaining and protecting that brand value and reputation. Some alarming statistics as to, again, why you should care about the ethical issues in the supply chain. It's estimated that about 35.8 million people are enslaved globally. And it's actually noted that about 18.8 million people of these enslaved people are actually in the top 25 exporting countries to the United Kingdom. So in the United Kingdom, we're actually sourcing from the top 25 areas of countries that enslave people, about 18.8 million people. So pretty significant numbers here that we're talking. And of these, 18.8, about 14.2 come from India alone and 3.2 come from China. So if you're in industries that are noted here on this screen, it is a significant concern, and it is happening within your supply chain if you're operating in these countries. So it is really important to start taking notice and start doing something to mitigate these ethical issues that are starting to become more and more prevalent and known. Additionally, if you think about your corporate policies, so you think about your corporate mantra, your corporate mottos that you develop, it's all related to how you work with your employees, how you treat your employees. And I think that most companies will work really, really hard to create strong, working hour policies, overtime pay, equal treatment at their headquarters sites. Some of those ethical issues that you should be concerned with as a business. And they maintain and develop these ethical programs for their headquarters site, yet are not as concerned, we'll say, with some of the same treatment that is happening at their suppliers. And in actuality, these suppliers are a part of your business. These factories, these business partners you're doing business with on a regular basis are part of your business. So it's important, I think, that you take these corporate policies that you're developing at your own sites and put them externally and make sure that they're being followed externally by your suppliers who are, in fact, a part of your business structure. So you want to make sure that they're adhering to the same corporate values you're instilling on your own employees and your own corporate sites. And this just reemphasizes this point a little bit that, your human resources department are investing in the employees and your employees' well-being. So your suppliers are an extension of your business. So they really should be treated with the same policies and instilled in the same values and have the same treatment that you're using at your own sites that you are working with. So your supply chain is an extension of your business, both in the positive and also the way that it could tarnish your brand. So maintaining those equal policies or equal treatment is pivotal to maintaining an ethical business structure. To transition briefly, what we'll go over now is just some of the legislative drivers as it relates to human rights issues that have started to surface over the last years within the European Union. So if you look at a timeline here, there's human rights laws and regulations that have passed, both in terms of directives for human rights issues, but also as it relates to concrete law. So for example, there's a timeline starting from September 2013 where EU conflict minerals were first proposed, all the way to them actually starting to take effect in a regulatory perspective. So we'll go over each of these. First being the corporate social responsibility laws in France. In fact, France has just had a new proposal to require strict reporting on human rights and environmental issues as it relates to the subsidiaries, contractors, and suppliers of major corporations. These restrictions or reporting mechanisms will require companies to publicize and implement what we'll call vigilance plans prior to doing business. So there's this concept of pre-qualifying your suppliers to ensure that they do have the same ethical and human rights policies in place before you start doing business with them. So this is part of a broader trend of the EU starting to enforce and increasingly pass strict social responsibility laws and really laws that directly relate to the ethical practices of your supply chain And these regulatory drivers just show the further need to actually begin and create a process for ethical human rights issues. Additionally, what we'll have is conflict minerals legislations in the European Union, like I spoke about. It was proposed first, like we said, in early 2013, but at this stage, a new draft of the conflict minerals law was passed in May of 2015 of this year. And this draft law essentially is the next step for the conflict minerals legislation to becoming concrete law that can be that you can be imposed against companies. So essentially, the draft makes compliance with the regulations mandatory, but it's still, the European Commission still must approve the draft in order for it to have voluntary compliance. So these are essentially, the conflict minerals legislation is applying to supply chains worldwide, and not just the one applying to the mines in Africa, like the similar piece of law that's passed in the United States called the Dodd-Frank Act. So it would affect, essentially, if it were to pass, about 880,000 companies worldwide that are actually operating in the European Union. This piece here is one I'm going to spend most of the time talking about today as it relates to the human rights issues within the supply chain. And this act, the UK Modern Slavery Act, is an absolutely monumental act that's passed. And what it essentially has said is that the United Kingdom is now taking steps to eradicating slavery and forced labor in the supply chain, and is imposing these regulations on corporations. So the requirements are that commercial organizations must prepare a slavery or human trafficking statement for each financial year. And not only do you have to prepare a statement, but the statement has to either say you have taken steps to ensure there's no slavery in your supply chain or your business, or your statement has to say that your organization has taken no steps. And if you say you've taken no steps, essentially that is directly affecting your brand reputation out in the marketplace. So it is imperative, I think, to beginning thoughts around how you're going to begin assessing forced and slave labor within your supply chain, and as well as within your business. So the requirement is to publish a public statement. The statement can include things like your organizational structure, your corporate policies related to human trafficking. But most importantly, I think the thing is about how you're assessing risk in your supply chain. And essentially what that is the due diligence process and understanding where in your business slavery does exist and what is the risk as it relates to that. And once you've assessed where the risk could be, how you're going to then therefore assess and manage that risk. And this is all part of the clause, I'd say part 6, section 54, that is directly related to transparency in the supply chain. Some tips I would say additionally as far as what statements can include is the level of effectiveness. So if you think about it, it's multiple steps. It's identifying where risk could occur. Once you've identified where risk could occur, you then assess and manage that risk. But then you also have to measure how effective that assessing and management process is, so that you're ensuring that no slavery does actually exist in your supply chain, and you're measuring it against some very key performance indicators that allow you to benchmark yourself, but also benchmarking yourself against the industry. So it's a pretty significant act here, and the magnitude is large as well. The magnitude will apply in the fact that it applies to any commercial organization that provides goods or services in the UK above a £36 million threshold. So I think that that's the key point is, it's widely applicable to almost any business that has operations in the UK. I mean, the £36 million threshold turnover is really not that high. So if you're not thinking about how to start addressing this, it's probably time to start addressing this, because this act will apply to you if you have operations in the UK and are of decent or mid-sized company at £36 million turnover. The key things as well is, talk about brand value and brand reputation, that this statement actually must be published on your corporate website and in a prominent location. So it's not like you could just hide this statement from the rest of the business, or hide the statement from your consumers or your people you're providing services to. It actually does have to be public, and therefore, again, it directly relates to the brand reputation you're trying to establish, which I think is very key. Additionally, there are and will maybe penalties and repercussions if you do not publish a statement, and there's potential civil proceedings that could take place. But additionally, again, your corporate brand and the lack of consumer trust will be, I think, one of the most significant repercussions of this not complying or not carrying out a ethical due diligence program. So again, it's really key. I think this is a monumental step in requiring companies to begin this ethical due diligence and risk assessment process. And these legislative drivers are really the why. The why should you care? The why should you take part in this? You obviously should care because of the different morals or mottos that you establish within your company. But now these legislative drivers are actually the formal reason as to why you should care. So to move forward, I would just say, so now that these pieces of legislations do exist and that you will likely be forced to comply, you then start asking your question, okay, well, how do I comply? Or what does good look like? How do I begin this process? And I think that that's really where you're starting to take into account things like, can you answer some of these key questions about your organization? Just let me paint a scenario. Your CEO is actually working in the media, and they have this press interview, and the press starts to ask them about the Modern Slavery Act in the UK, for example, and start asking you these specific questions about how many suppliers do you have? How many of these suppliers are direct versus indirect suppliers? So just purely knowing, who you're sourcing from can be a hard question oftentimes for your CEO to answer in a press scenario. But then also, do you actually verify the profiles of these suppliers? Do you conduct ethical human rights assessments on these suppliers? And if you have done a risk assessment, do you actually do follow-up on-site audits? Where are the issues? What improvements have you made? What key performance indicators are you tracking? So essentially, it's asking, the CEO, can you tell your supply chain story? And as this ethical and human rights issues start to become more prominent, I'd say that it's going to be more and more imperative that you're able to provide these responses to your CEO to answer these questions about your supply chain story. So here's what good looks like, I would say. That is essentially that your corporate values are aligned with some of your procurement risk and ethical programs. So get everyone together. Take on this risk assessment process together. Don't actually draw lines between your procurement and your risk and your ethical groups. Make sure that all of the programmed mantra and the program mottos that you start to go out with are representing your corporate values. It is your brand that you're willing to protect, so make sure you do that. Conduct risk assessments. Maintain a living profile of your suppliers in accordance to the impact they have on your business. So are they a critical supplier? Are they private label? What country are they operating in? And once you have that, criticality started to assess, then categorize your supplier into risk profiles. So, which are your high severe risk suppliers versus which are your suppliers that may be lower guarded risk? And then obviously with that risk-based approach, you're able to tailor which areas are of greatest concern and allocate financial resources to do on-site audits and to do corrective actions or collaborate towards improvement mechanisms with your suppliers that are of the highest risk to your business in relation to ethical concerns. And I think that at this stage, that's where you're able to really truly measure and monitor and improve the progress of your suppliers as it relates to performance issues around ethics and social concerns. So I think, that's what good looks like. That's really what an ethical risk assessment process is for your supply chain. And to further break that down, I'll say I'm going to quickly just put it into 5 simple steps for you. Highlighting some of the issues I just was speaking about, but more specifically talking about what are these 5 steps. So to start with, I think that the 5 steps are really in line with how to best comply and create the statement for legislative drivers like the Modern Slavery Act, for example. So I think the first step is to set key performance indicators or goals for your social responsibility program. And make sure that those goals and key performance indicators are in line with what your strategic objectives are. So set the objectives to meet your strategic objectives. Make sure they're aligned. A company needs to make sure that that's how you're going to get support of the executives, of the upper management, to make sure that it's measurable and ongoing, and that it keeps your company in line and holistic as it relates to their strategic goals. So right now at this stage with step 1, I would say you're going to start with lots of questions. So some of the questions that you should start asking when you're starting to develop a risk assessment program for ethical concerns are, do you have executive buy-in to this program? Are your upper management going to buy into you carrying out this ethical risk assessment program? Secondly, how many suppliers do you want to assess? There often is some kind of tiering system that you can start to develop where you're actually starting to say, okay, I know that these suppliers are of utmost concern to me. I'm going to assess those suppliers first. Then you can say, okay, now that you know which suppliers you want to assess, then you start to say, okay, well, how do I determine the tolerant level of risk? When you start the assessment process, you need to understand, where is my tolerance of risk? What are my main primary concerns as it relates to human rights issues? And are my suppliers complying with that? And once you've identified, okay, this is acceptable or this is not, then you can say, okay, well, how much do you want to know about those concerns? So it's all developing your tolerance, but then also developing your depth of knowledge. You want to know that when you set up a set of audit criteria, you're getting information that you know how to handle and information that you know how to digest and then mitigate. So I think that that's the big key point there, is just when you start to want to know how much information do you want to gather about your suppliers. And then again, in line with, what your strategic objectives are, identify what those morals, those mottos, those goals of your corporation are. And once you've identified those mottos and morals of your company, which are probably all over your company website, make sure that the structure of your program is actually in line with those morals and governance principles that your company has. And then I think the final thing will probably be just make sure that you have a way to measure the success of the program. So when you're starting to create this, right from the beginning how you would note if you're successful 6 months down the road, a year from now. You're able to already understand what are you going to measure yourselves in. So I think that that's a key point too. So what does good look like for your business? So once you started to set out and have responses to some of those key questions in the development stage, the next step I would say is understanding which suppliers to include. And which suppliers to include, I think, directly relates to, if you're sourcing from multiple countries, directly relates to how many suppliers you have in the different countries, and then what is the country risk as it relates to that. So if you look at, okay, let's say you source from Peru, China, Spain, Bangladesh, and Germany. You need some kind of understanding as to, out of those countries, which are the highest risk countries for your business. And there are intelligence tools out there. Like I said at the beginning, BSI actually has a human rights country risk rating for all the countries in the world that allows you to start benchmarking which are the countries you should prioritize, and then which countries you should definitely ensure your suppliers are included in this overall ethical program that you're developing. So using, like I said, the heat map and understanding the intelligence of the countries will allow you to say, okay, I know I want to include the suppliers for Peru, China, and Bangladesh as a very first wave, if you will, a very first wave or crack at trying to understand the ethical issues, and prioritize those suppliers first. And then you can start working down your supply chain into the other countries after you've gotten a handle on which of the high risk suppliers are ethically strong or ethically weak. Then I think the key point about the next steps is, okay, you now know how you're going to measure. You've got your executive buy-in. Now you're really ready to say, okay, what is going to be my process for actually carrying out the assessment part? And I think there's two folds to this. I think it's, what is the criteria of your assessment going to be, but then also how you're going to carry out the assessment. So, when you're looking at criteria of the assessment for ethical risk, you're looking at, which are the most important areas of must-knows, if you will, for your business. So what are the wage rights of employees? What are the working conditions? Are things like health and safety and working hours most important to you? So I think understanding those criteria of assessments allows you to then, again, be able to measure and see how you're performing against that criteria. But it's something I think that customers struggle with right at the start is helping and understanding how to create that criteria of the assessment. And that's something obviously we help companies with on a really regular basis here at BSI, is creating that assessment criteria, but then also ensuring that you're measuring yourself appropriately. So once you have the criteria, then there's a way to say, okay, well, how am I going to assess against that criteria? Am I going to do self-assessments? Am I going to do on-site audits, or both? Self-assessments initially and then on-site audits on your highest risk suppliers. And then when you decide to do audits, are you going to outsource those audits, or are they going to be in-house resources? It's deciding, is a company like BSI going to actually go out on our behalf and carry out those audits for us? Or is it going to be based on, in-house resources where we're sending our own auditors? Those are some of the decisions financially that can start to be made when you're integrating this ethical risk assessment procedure into your business. Additionally, you want to understand, where is your risk scoring going to come out? How are you going to score your suppliers and the different risks that you start to identify? And then is it going to be a manual approach, or is there going to be software automation, such as using the BSI tools here? Is it going to be automated through an audit platform like the SCM tool at BSI, or are you going to manually facilitate some of this information through risk assessment via Excel spreadsheets, for example? And I think that developing this integrated approach, you want to do it holistically and you want to do it effectively. And I think that those are key elements as it relates to what step 3 is in your overall process. The key other point I would say in step 4 is, okay, so now you've determined how you're going to carry out the assessment, but I think also the important thing is, once you've understood that, how you're going to carry out an assessment, it's now formalizing this process within your supplier legal terms and in your internal policies. So to make sure that your ethical supply chain assessment procedures are followed by all of your suppliers and business partners, you need to incorporate it into your contractual language. And things like, you want to refer to the terms and conditions in your contracts about the requirement of to do business with your company. You want to eliminate slavery, forced labor, human trafficking. You wanted to be able to describe, what are those minimum labor standards that must be followed in order to be a part of your supply chain. So it again reverts back to that criteria of the assessment. What are the criteria points of your suppliers that you must actually comply with as a minimum for labor standards for your business? Also, I think if you're going to carry out an assessment or audit procedure, make sure that completion of that audit or the completion of that assessment is part of your overall pre-qualification process before you even begin to enter in a contractual relationship with the suppliers. And having that pre-qualification understanding of how ethical your supplier is versus how ethical another supplier is will allow you to integrate this into the supplier's mentality and allow you to integrate this into the supplier's everyday process and procedures, so that right from the beginning, when the supplier does business with your company, they know that this is a very important topic and something that you will take as an utmost priority when you're contracting it, and then also when you maintain the business relationship with that supplier. So I think that's a key point, and again, this formalization of the ethical risk assessment program takes place when considering your legal contracts with your suppliers. So step 5 is the final step, and I think this is, up until this point we're talking about setting up the program. I think that now what we're doing here is maintaining the program of ethical assessments. So step 5 is really creating the trainings and to educate the business on the importance of this initiative. So you're going to establish some, webinar-based or automated-based training for your employees to actually carry out and gain awareness of these global human rights issues within supply chain, but also awareness of what you're doing to mitigate these threats. All your employees need to be on board and aware of this ethical risk assessment process that you're carrying out on your suppliers. So it's making them aware of why it's important, and then also making them aware of what you're doing. And once you're able to do that, I think create these e-learnings, if you will, or educational training programs for your employees internally. You then also want to integrate it into your pre-employment process. So as soon as employees are hired, they now are integrated into the social responsibility mindset and culture of your business right from the beginning and right from the onset of their employment with your company. So it establishes this integrated culture that you can have with your business about human rights risk assessments and understanding, where are your weak points, and making sure you have a corporate-wide approach to identifying, managing, and mitigating the human rights issues within your business. So it's that cultural aspect of your business that you're trying to accomplish through this training. So overall, I think there's 5 key steps, again, to ensure that you're maintaining and creating this program. First is making sure that your strategic goals meet up with your strategic initiatives of this ethical program. Secondly, to identify from country risk who your suppliers or which suppliers you want to incorporate into this program. Third is the assessment criteria development and the way you actually carry out this assessment program, so the method behind it. The fourth is the legal and contractual agreements you have with your suppliers and making sure they portray and understand to the suppliers what the importance of this is and the legal ramifications of it. And then finally, to make it more aware and widespread across your business through educational trainings about human rights issues in the supply chain. And these are really, 5 concrete, simple steps that, BSI works with companies on a regular basis to carry out and also develop the ethical risk assessment program. So please do let us know if this is of interest to carry out or address further. I do hope that this webinar has been helpful for you to understand the importance of what ethical rights are within companies, and then also within companies' supply chains, and also understanding what the legal or legislative ramifications are if you don't take on this initiative, as countries are regularly passing more and more stringent laws as it relates to ethical risks and forced labor. And then finally, I hope the 5 ways that we've highlighted today really do show you a concrete step-by-step process on how to identify, manage, and mitigate the supply chain issues as it relates to human rights and ethical risks in your supply chain. So I want to thank you today for joining our webinar, and I hope you find it useful. We will address the questions on a one-to-one basis moving forward, and if you have any questions about today's topic, please contact us on the details provided here.